CBS Evening News. Susan Spencer sitting in tonight for Bob Schieffer. Good evening. The Chinese government's long arm of terror extended its reach today with the capture of 2 more student leaders, death sentences for 8 other supposed subversives, and the expulsion of several Western journalists whose mistake was reporting the facts. John Shan in Beijing has the story.
7 men and 1 woman were sentenced to death today in a Beijing court on charges of setting fire to vehicles and beating soldiers during the army's bloody invasion of the city 2 weeks ago. These were the first accused to be condemned to die for resisting the army's assault on pro-democracy protesters. Officials also announced the capture of 2 more students named as leaders of the ill-fated campaign for democratic rights. The Chinese government again rejected international condemnation of the sweeping crackdown, calling the criticism interference in China's internal affairs.
Right now they have very definite priorities, and the priorities are domestic. They'll worry about the rest of the world later.
Alan Pesson's news reports of the slaughter at Tiananmen Square angered Chinese officials. He and Associated Press correspondent John Pomfret, both accredited correspondents, were expelled. The Americans were accused of violating martial law restrictions on news reporting that have been generally ignored by Western correspondents.
The Chinese government has made it really impossible to cover the news if you follow their rules to the letter. But that's not going to stop anybody.
The government propaganda campaign for public acceptance of martial law today included soldiers giving free haircuts in Beijing streets. And troops of young pioneers were marched to the center of the city for the first public ceremony to be held at Tiananmen Square since the massacre. The Communist Party staged the observance for love of the socialist motherland. Despite the colorful ceremony by a carefully screened group, the square remains heavily guarded by soldiers and closed to the general public to prevent its becoming a place of pilgrimage in memory of thousands killed and wounded in the anti-democracy crackdown. John Sheehan, CBS News, Beijing.
China experts and journalists alike were shocked 2 weeks ago when the Chinese army made its bloody foray into Tiananmen Square. Historians, perhaps, were not so surprised. Bill Whitaker puts the crackdown in perspective.
The troops that patrol the streets of Beijing today and the tanks that back them up have roots deep in Chinese history, roots that go back centuries before the communist takeover in 1949. As thousands of terracotta soldiers guarding the 2,000-year-old tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi attest, terror, intimidation, and propaganda are traditional tools of Chinese leaders.
From Emperor Qin Shi Huang 2,000 years ago, who buried intellectuals and burned books as he unified China, to Deng Xiaoping, who would also like authority, control, and progress without the people having their say.
When Mao Zedong and the communists took power in 1949, millions of Chinese were forcibly sent to so-called re-education camps to ensure correct socialist thinking. During the Cultural Revolution of the 60s and 70s, security forces stormed Tiananmen Square, killing more than 100 protesters accused of counter-revolutionary behavior. Deng Xiaoping was himself a victim of the Cultural Revolution, but once back in power, he too used force to suppress opposition. 2 years ago, he cut down a relatively small democracy movement and purged student hero Hu Yaobang for being soft on dissent. It was Hu's death in April that sparked student protests this spring and the subsequent crackdown that has thrown China back into darkness.
The pull of that traditional China, and the army's part of it because it's a peasant army, is a heavy weight against the forces of modernization.
Deng once said that China would have to allow in a few flies when it opened its windows to the world. Now he's made abundantly clear, if the flies become too numerous, he's more than willing to swat them down. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Beijing.
An East German airliner bound for Moscow crashed on takeoff today from East Berlin. As many as 16 people are feared to have died when the plane veered off a runway and suddenly burst into flames. Most of the 113 passengers and crew did, however, escape without serious injury. In Paris tonight, a 100th birthday bash attended by hundreds of thousands. The occasion, the 1989 opening of the Paris World Fair and its spanking new Eiffel Tower. But today's centennial party is only the warm-up for bicentennial celebrations that some charge are as tacky as they are elaborate. Doug Tennell reports.
The lavish party is just getting underway. But the celebrations here around the Eiffel Tower are merely a prelude to a full month of festivities from now until July 14th, the Bicentennial of the French Revolution. It's been 200 years since Louis XVI's royals went too far and France rebelled. What followed 1789 was an orgy of chaotic violence, but what is about to follow is an orgy of commercialism, so chaotic that some fear France may be about to lose its place as Europe's tribune of good taste and capital of culture. Just imagine a hot afternoon in a revolutionary crowd with everyone wearing bicentennial perfume, a revolutionary t-shirt, and swilling bicentennial wine that even amateurs consider little more than bottled headache. For a breather, you can buy a can of revolutionary air. For a quick history fix, there is a video cassette, The Revolution in 60 Seconds. But some French intellectuals now say the revolution really changed little in France, that the divide between rich and poor today is at least as deep as the desire to be one of the rich. The descendants of French aristocrats are everywhere in the offices of the conservative mayor of Paris, Jacques Chirac. They are now helping to commemorate a revolution that set out to sweep their ancestors away. But President Francois Mitterrand's socialist followers are also organizing events. The two sides are in competition. It was to have been expected that the French would make the question of how to celebrate the revolution a political issue. The tragedy is that in the meantime, history's most famous revolution is being reduced to just another bad taste sales pitch. Doug Tennell, CBS News, Paris.
Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, the delegate balance at the United Auto Workers Convention. And later, Bruce Morton on a press for change at the U.S. Mint. Space Shuttle astronaut S. David Griggs was killed today when the private plane he was flying crashed in eastern Arkansas. He was 49. The cause of the crash isn't known. Griggs was a mission specialist on a shuttle flight 4 years ago and was scheduled to pilot a mission later on this year. Army experts are investigating the crash of a Delaware National Guard helicopter in Yarmouth on Cape Cod. All 6 men on board were killed when the chopper went down early this morning in dense fog. No one on the ground was hurt. Scores of airline workers marched side by side with striking Eastern employees at Los Angeles International Airport today. They were protesting plans by Eastern boss Frank Lorenzo to resume service to LA next month. Most Eastern air and ground crews have been on strike for 15 weeks. In Anaheim, not far from that show of labor solidarity, less than unified auto workers are gathering for their every third-year convention. As Scott Pelley reports, a dissident movement charges that union leaders are out of touch with the rank and file.
On the eve of the United Auto Workers Convention, there is growing debate over the revolutionary contracts that provide unprecedented cooperation between labor and management. Cooperation that union leadership says saves jobs.
A union has to evolve, it has to innovate, it has to be ahead of the times.
But a growing minority has split with UAW leadership, charging the union has given away too much.
Concessions do not save jobs. Concessions only bring on more concessions.
Don Douglas is running for the union's executive board. He represents a group called New Directions, which believes the union has become too friendly with management. The new contracts emphasize labor management teams, productivity, and bonuses based on profits. Some members believe union solidarity has been undermined.
Some of the joint programs tend to pit worker against worker, and department against department, and plant against plant.
Beaver believes cooperation was the union's only route.
We're going to maintain our militancy, we're going to maintain our identity, we're going to be innovative, and we're going to recognize that the world has changed around us.
At this convention, the New Directions delegates represent perhaps the most organized dissident group in the history of the union. But that does not ensure their victory. New Directions represents only about 10% of the delegates. Bieber says that level of support proves the vast majority of members are happy with the contracts.
Well, if you take out all the joint programs that we have in our agreements, what would you have? Somebody would get hung. Membership would take you to the gallows in a hurry.
I think we've already won. I think they know that they're going to have to do something now. They know that there are too many people dissatisfied with the direction they're going in.
But Bieber is expected to easily win a third term as president, and two New Directions candidates running for executive board will likely lose their bids. But the dissidents say their issues are now part of the union's debate as the UAW seeks a course for its second 50 years. Scott Pelley, CBS News, Anaheim, California.
In the next decade, some of those auto workers could very well be building cars that run on so-called alternative fuels. The driving force behind that idea is President Bush, as White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews reports.
It could change the shape of your car, change the station where you pump gas, and if President Bush is right, it could begin to clean up the air. Some call it Fantasyland, but part of the president's clean air package unveiled this week would force the Detroit automakers to produce and sell 500,000 cars capable of burning fuels other than gasoline by the year 1995. Then 1 million such cars every year by 1997, just 7 car production years away.
Alternative fuel is going to help us reconcile the automobile to our environment.
Everyone who expected Detroit to cry foul was wrong this time. Detroit, in fact, said it could meet the president's deadline.
We, surprisingly, to a lot of people perhaps, think this is a step in the right direction.
That's because Ford and General Motors are already making test fleets of flexibly fueled cars. In Sacramento, California Energy Commission staffers are now driving the latest GM flex-fueled vehicle, a car capable of burning methanol, ethanol, or gasoline, and in any combination. The automakers boast that in engine technology, this burn-anything engine is not a fantasy.
These microprocessors instantly sense it, send a message to the engine saying, you're now burning this combination of fuel. It automatically changes the valves in the carburation to burn that kind of fuel.
The opposition to Mr. Bush's flexible fuel idea, again a surprise, comes from environmentalists. They say methanol is no answer to pollution because it emits formaldehyde, and that creates smog too.
Methanol is a poison. It is more poisonous than gasoline.
Environmentalists also charge that Mr. Bush is pushing alternative fuels to distract from his failure to make Detroit build a cleaner car. There are obstacles in the way of the president's million-car dream, more engine improvements, a complete revamping of the fuel and gas station industry, and possibly a new and even cleaner high-tech fuel. Without those changes, his critics say, the president is selling Fantasyland. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
This weekend is off to a stormy start in the southeast. The Carolinas were especially hard hit. Tornadoes and thunderstorms damaged hundreds of buildings, and falling trees and telephone poles are blamed for 2 deaths. Utility workers spent the day restoring power to tens of thousands of homes. As we reported earlier, 2 more journalists left China today, expelled by the government for their reporting. Governments, of course, have tried to use the press in the past, but in the last few weeks, the Chinese may have sunk to new lows. This was the interview that brought home to everyone the new reality. Cameras can be weapons, too. A man related what he'd seen in the square, to the applause of his friends. Next day, he was on TV again. The Chinese government using pictures stolen off a satellite feed as evidence of a crime. It raised great concern for all the ordinary citizens interviewed in those heady days of Tiananmen Square. People now on wanted lists.
If it's an ethical concept and you feel that the Chinese or any other government, including the American government, are going to use pictures to prosecute people and perhaps eventually murder them, then you have an ethical dilemma. Do you do it or do you not?
As a matter of fact, it's a subversive thing for a journalist to do. The journalist shouldn't second-guess reality by saying, is this going to be good or bad in the future? because that's what a propagandist does.
Today, the propagandist is alive and well in Beijing, the people cowed. While foreign journalists may fight manipulation and wrestle with ethics, China's journalists, only 3 weeks ago covering the demonstrations, are once again the government's tools. In the official media now, the square where everything happened is declared the square where nothing happened.
Their desperate effort to bury the truth of this situation shows that power out of the barrel of a gun is not enough.
Stealing TV pictures off satellites may be the most sophisticated manipulation of the press so far, and the most insidious, but the impulse is nothing new, nor is it restricted to totalitarian states. In the anti-war days of the 60s, FBI agents often posed as reporters, taking pictures, using TV footage in court. The U.S. government prevented press coverage of the invasion of Grenada. The British did the same in the Falklands. Israeli police sometimes pretend they are reporters today. Israeli TV now rarely shows violence in the occupied territories. And South Africans never see pictures like these. But increasingly, attempts at total control fail. With fax machines and satellites and shortwave radios, it's hard to stop all information. Ironically, the same international communications that led to one man's downfall may in the end undermine his government's attempts to rewrite the story.
In the modern world of electronic technology, the effort to control the truth is harder than ever. I hope that it's becoming impossible.
Organizers called the city's largest ever pro-choice rally. 7,500 pro-choice supporters gathered at the Daly Center Plaza. The rally was an attempt to drum up support in advance of a Supreme Court ruling on abortion that could come Monday. The desert wasteland of southern Arizona used to in fact be deserted. Now it is teeming with traffic, drug traffic. Jerry Bowen reports that smugglers have made the area their favorite point of entry, and they're very quick on the trigger.
Check out the take from just one day. The truck loaded with marijuana, the bales of pot abandoned along the border, the $2 million in cash and cocaine. Check out the take and you quickly realize the Old West has become the new front line in the drug war.
The state of Arizona has become a major cocaine smuggling pipeline.
Southern Arizona has become Cocaine Alley because of the stepped-up enforcement in Florida and the soaring demand in nearby Southern California. Smuggling is so heavy here, ranchers have installed gates to prevent broken fences. Small dirt roads turned to freeways with drug traffic that used to go through Miami, but now takes the Mexico route because there's so little resistance.
You can see the road usage, and that road is capable of 60-mile-an-hour traffic. You can work 20 hours a day and never make a dent in the activity.
And with the increased drug traffic has come new terror. 17 murders in 1 week alone along the border with Mexico. Carnage blamed on violence-prone Colombian dealers who are claiming a larger share of the action.
And now you got people that are kind of wacko, and there's a heck of a lot of money involved, and they're willing to shoot it out.
And routine law enforcement has become anything but. Officer Dennis Kubik made what he thought was just another traffic stop until the driver, a drug dealer, opened up with an Uzi machine gun. The dealer is dead. Kubik is different.
You deal with the people now on a more cautious level. You're unaware of who's going to have the gun or who's going to have the knife.
Tucson's Border Patrol agents have seized more than a ton of marijuana.
And what used to be some other town's news has become the stuff of daily headlines in Tucson. And there are fears for the town's young people.
We used to think that maybe it can't happen here or not in my neighborhood or not my kid. I'm not so sure that we can protect everybody.
So once again, at one more border entry, U.S. law enforcement steps up the pace. Heavily armed customs agents scan the border at night. National Guard troops inspect trucks for contraband. But the drug experts aren't optimistic. At best, they contend all the extra cops and crackdowns will just force Cocaine Alley to move somewhere else. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
Tonight, the pressing debate over U.S. currency. Is it time for a change in our change? Bruce Morton reports on this tender issue.
Emerson wrote, "Money, in its effects and laws, is as beautiful as roses. But what about American money? American coins? Joys forever, maybe, but things of beauty?
They didn't impress me as being relevant, and they certainly aren't beautiful.
Fine Arts Commissioner Wolf and a number of congressmen and senators want to change the coins. We've had the same nickel since 1938, the same quarter since 32, and so on. Besides, they say the government would make money issuing new coins. How? People will buy new coins to keep as souvenirs. It costs less than a dime to make a dime, so those extra dimes mean extra profit.
The country will make a net profit for the government without increased taxation of $366 million.
But the folks at the Mint, these coins are being made in Philadelphia, say that's just wrong. You don't make money, they say. All you do is pay a little less interest on the national debt. Very little.
That's what it all boils down to, $3 million a year.
Would the new coins make money? Depends whom you ask. Would new coins be good for other reasons?
Coinage is sometimes seen as a way of transferring or transmitting, rather, ideas to the public.
This striding liberty came out as America was moving toward entering World War I, for instance. Wolf would keep the presidents on the front of the coins, but have Bill of Rights themes on the tails.
Since 1909, we've had the same penny. And I just don't see it. I mean, okay, Lincoln was a great man, but it's time to give somebody else a chance or something else a chance.
Coin dealers and coin collectors favor change. Mint Director Pope asks, if it ain't broke, why fix it?
So without people saying out there, say, listen, we'd like our coins changed, why in the world would the Treasury Department do it and risk it?
Money may be, as Emerson said, as beautiful as roses. We know what roses look like. But money? There seems to be an argument about that. Bruce Warren, CBS News, Washington.
That is the CBS Evening News. Connie Chung will be here tomorrow. And later tonight on West 57th, a Mississippi town still haunted by the murder of 3 civil rights workers a quarter of a century ago. I'm Susan Spencer in New York. Have a good evening.
Indy Thunder. The Valvoline Detroit Grand Prix tomorrow on CBS Sports.
This is CBS.